Elena Cross had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being unremarkable. But when 12 armed mercenaries breached Fort Blackwater during what should have been a routine civilian tour, even the base's elite Delta Force operators would stop mid-firefight just to watch her move. What they didn't know was that the quiet woman asking polite questions about base operations had once been Phantom, the most decorated female operator in Unit Shadow 6 history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Blackwater's main gate as Elena Cross approached the visitor checkpoint, her worn leather messenger bag slung casually over her shoulder. She wore simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, a navy blazer, and comfortable walking shoes, the kind of outfit that suggested she was just another contractor or family member visiting the sprawling military installation. Name and purpose of visit? Asked the young MP at the security station, his uniform crisp and his demeanor professionally polite. Elena Cross, I'm here for the 0900 civilian tour, she replied, offering her driver's license and the email confirmation she'd printed the night before. Her voice carried no trace of the authority that had once commanded rooms full of hardened soldiers, no hint of the steel that had gotten her through missions most people couldn't imagine. The MP scanned her documents, checked her name against his list, and handed her a visitor's badge. Building 23, ma'am. Staff Sergeant Park will be your tour guide. Please remain with the group at all times and follow all posted security protocols. Elena clipped the badge to her blazer and walked through the metal detector, moving with the unremarkable gait of someone who'd spent years learning to blend in. But old habits died hard. Even as she maintained her civilian facade, her eyes automatically cataloged security cameras, exit routes, and the positions of armed personnel. 3 years of deliberately mundane living hadn't erased 20 years of tactical training. Building 23 sat at the heart of Fort Blackwater, a modern structure that housed the base's administrative offices and briefing rooms. Elena arrived 10 minutes early, finding herself in a sterile waiting area with uncomfortable chairs and motivational posters, featuring dramatic photos of soldiers in action. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd lived those dramatic moments. But now she was relegated to looking at them from the outside. Are you here for the tour too? Asked a cheerful voice beside her. Elena turned to see a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and an expensive handbag. She wore the kind of clothes that suggested corporate success and suburban comfort. Yes, I'm Elena, she replied, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Rebecca Torres. I'm thinking about relocating here for work. My company has a contract with the base. Figured I should see what kind of place I'd be living near. Rebecca settled into the chair next to Elena's. What about you, military family? The question hit closer to home than Rebecca could have known. Elena had been military family once, in a way. But explaining that would require explaining too much about who she used to be. Just curious about the base, Elena said carefully. I work in logistics consulting. Always interesting to see how different organizations handle operations. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did work in logistics now, managing supply chains for a mid-sized civilian company. It was quiet work, predictable work, the kind of job where nobody asked uncomfortable questions about gaps in her resume or why someone with her education was content with such modest responsibilities. At exactly 0900 hours, a lean soldier in his 30s entered the waiting area. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing confident but approachable. 3 chevrons and a rocker identified him as a staff sergeant. Good morning, everyone. I'm Staff Sergeant Alex Park, and I'll be conducting your tour of Fort Blackwater today. His voice carried the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd given this presentation many times before. We've got a great morning planned. You'll see our training facilities, meet some of our personnel, and get a real feel for what makes this base special. Elena counted 8 civilians in the group: herself, Rebecca, an elderly man who introduced himself as a local historian, a young couple considering military careers, 2 contractors working on base infrastructure, and a journalist writing a feature story about military life. A typical mix of visitors with typical reasons for being there. "Before we begin," Park continued, "I need to remind everyone about our security protocols. Please stay with the group at all times. Photography is limited to designated areas only. And if you hear any alarms or announcements, follow my instructions immediately without question." Elena nodded along with the others, but part of her mind was already analyzing Park's demeanor. He was professional, competent, probably saw the civilian tours as a minor duty assignment. But there was something in his eyes, a alertness that suggested he took security more seriously than his cheerful presentation implied. They began the tour in Koshore, Building 23's main conference room, where Park used a PowerPoint presentation to outline Fort Blackwater's history and mission. Elena found herself only half listening to the standard talking points about military readiness and community partnership. Instead, she was studying the building's layout, noting the security measures, observing the personnel who moved through the corridors with the purposeful stride of people who had important work to do. Fort Blackwater is home to approximately 15,000 active duty personnel, Park was saying, including some of our military's most elite units. While we can't discuss specific operational details, I can tell you that the men and women stationed here represent the absolute best of American military capability. Rebecca raised her hand. "What kind of elite units? Like special forces?" Park's smile remained professional, but Elena caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "We host various specialized units, but specific details are classified. What I can tell you is that Fort Blackwater serves as a training and staging area for operations that require the highest levels of skill and preparation." Elena knew exactly what kind of units Park was diplomatically avoiding naming. Fort Blackwater was known in certain circles as a hub for Delta Force operations, though that designation would never appear on any public materials. She'd worked with Delta operators before, back when her own unit had needed their particular expertise for missions that existed only in heavily redacted after-action reports. The tour moved to the base's motor pool, where Park showed them maintenance facilities that kept hundreds of vehicles operational. Elena found herself automatically assessing the security measures, noting which areas were off-limits and which personnel carried themselves with the distinctive bearing of special operations soldiers. "Impressive operation," commented the historian, gesturing at the organized chaos of mechanics working on everything from Humvees to specialized tactical vehicles. "Logistics is the backbone of military effectiveness," Elena said, speaking before she could stop herself. "All the elite training in the world doesn't matter if you can't maintain your equipment and supply your people." Park looked at her with renewed interest. "That's exactly right. Most people focus on the exciting stuff, the weapons and tactics, but it's the support systems that really determine mission success." Elena felt a familiar warmth at being understood, then immediately suppressed it. She wasn't here to connect with military personnel or reminisce about her old life. She was here because she'd promised herself she'd take this tour, see what she'd left behind, and finally put that chapter of her life to rest. But as they walked through the base, past buildings where she could almost feel the intensity of specialized training happening behind closed doors, Elena realized that some chapters were harder to close than others. 3 years of civilian life had given her peace, stability, and safety, but it hadn't given her purpose. "Our next stop," Park announced as they approached a complex of newer buildings, "is our training command center. This is where we coordinate advanced tactical exercises and simulations." Elena's pulse quickened despite herself. She'd spent countless hours in similar facilities, planning missions that would take her and her team into the world's most dangerous places. The familiar mix of excitement and dread that preceded every operation, the weight of responsibility for bringing everyone home safely, the incredible rush of executing a perfect plan under impossible circumstances. She pushed the memories away and focused on maintaining her cover. She was Elena Cross, logistics consultant, civilian tour participant. Nothing more, nothing less. But as they entered the training facility, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about today's tour. Park seemed more alert than usual. Other personnel were moving with increased urgency, and there was a tension in the air that had nothing to do with routine training exercises. Her instincts, dulled by 3 years of deliberately mundane living, began to stir. Something was happening at Fort Blackwater, something that had nothing to do with civilian tours and everything to do with the kind of threats that required elite military response. Elena tried to tell herself it was paranoia, that she was seeing shadows where none existed. But 20 years of staying alive in dangerous situations had taught her to trust her instincts, even when she desperately wanted to ignore them. As the tour group gathered around Park for his next presentation, Elena found herself unconsciously positioning herself near the exit, her eyes scanning for potential threats, her mind automatically calculating response options. She was no longer just a civilian on a base tour. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, Phantom was beginning to wake up. The training command center buzzed with activity that seemed unusually intense for a Tuesday morning. Elena followed the tour group through the main corridor, but her attention was divided between Park's commentary and the subtle signs of elevated, alert status she recognized from her former life. This facility coordinates training exercises for multiple units simultaneously, Park explained, gesturing toward a bank of monitors displaying tactical scenarios. Our simulation capabilities allow soldiers to practice complex operations in virtual environments before deploying to real-world situations. Elena nodded politely while cataloging details that the other civilians missed entirely. Radio chatter carried an undertone of urgency. Personnel moved with a controlled haste. That indicated something beyond routine training. And most telling of all, she spotted 2 operators in civilian clothes whose body language and positioning screamed close protection detail. "Are those computer games?" asked the young man considering military service, pointing at workstations where soldiers manipulated controllers while watching multiple screens. "Sophisticated training simulators," Park corrected with a slight smile. "Much more complex than any game you've played. These systems can replicate everything from urban combat scenarios to hostage rescue operations with incredible realism." Rebecca raised her hand again. "Do you ever train for attacks on the base itself? I mean, security threats to the installation?" The question hung in the air for a moment longer than it should have. Elena caught the micro-expression that flashed across Park's face, not annoyance at the question, but genuine concern about how to answer it. "Base security is always a priority," he said carefully. "We conduct regular drills and maintain constant readiness protocols. Fort Blackwater's security measures are among the most advanced in the military." Elena's instincts sharpened. That was a deflection, not an answer. In her experience, when military personnel started speaking in careful generalities, it usually meant something specific was happening that they couldn't discuss. As they moved deeper into the facility, Elena began to notice patterns that troubled her. Security checkpoints that should have been manned by single guards had pairs of soldiers. Normally open doorways had been subtly restricted. And most concerning of all, she glimpsed personnel moving equipment that looked suspiciously like portable communication jammers. "Elena, right?" The historian had fallen into step beside her. "You seem to know a lot about military operations. Are you former service?" The question came out of nowhere, catching Elena off guard. She'd been so focused on reading the base's security posture that she'd forgotten to maintain her civilian Facade. No, just interested in organizational efficiency, she replied, forcing her voice to remain casual. I work in supply chain management, so I appreciate seeing well-run operations. But the historian's eyes remained curious, and Elena realized she'd been asking too many specific questions, noticing too many details that a civilian consultant shouldn't understand. Her cover was holding, but barely. They entered a briefing room where Park began explaining the base's role in training allied forces. Elena took a seat in the back row, a position that gave her clear sightlines to all entrances while appearing casual. Old habits died hard, even after 3 years of deliberate civilian living. Fort Blackwater hosts training exercises with military units from 17 different allied nations, Park was saying. These partnerships help ensure interoperability and strengthen international relationships. As he spoke, Elena's attention was drawn to a flicker of movement outside the briefing room's windows. Personnel were moving across the courtyard in formations that looked suspiciously like deployment patterns. Not the casual movement of soldiers going about routine duties, but the purposeful positioning of units preparing for potential action. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Elena glanced at it, expecting something work-related, but the sender was unknown and the message was cryptic. Package delivery delayed. Weather conditions unfavorable. She stared at the screen, her blood running cold. That phrasing, package delivery, weather conditions, was straight out of the operational code language she'd used for years. Someone was trying to communicate with her using terminology that only special operations personnel would recognize. Elena quickly deleted the message and slipped her phone back into her bag, but her mind was racing. Who knew she was here? Who had her number and knowledge of operational codes? And most importantly, why were they reaching out now? Ma'am, are you all right? Park had noticed her distraction. Sorry, work emergency, Elena said, managing an apologetic smile. Crisis in the supply chain. You know how it is. Park nodded sympathetically, but Elena caught him making eye contact with someone near the door. Just a quick glance, the kind of subtle communication that meant security personnel were sharing information. The tour continued to the base's medical facilities, but Elena's awareness had shifted into a different mode entirely. She was no longer Elena Cross, logistics consultant. She was Phantom, reading a tactical situation that was becoming more complex by the minute. The medical facility tour revealed more anomalies. Trauma bays that should have been in routine standby were being quietly prepped for casualties. Medical personnel were checking equipment with the thoroughness that preceded expected action. And most telling of all, she spotted blood supplies being moved into position, the kind of preparation that suggested someone expected serious injuries in the near future. Impressive facilities, commented Rebecca, apparently oblivious to the underlying tension. Do you handle many emergency cases? We're prepared for any medical situation that might arise, replied the medical officer conducting this portion of the tour. His answer was professional but vague, and Elena noticed he avoided making eye contact with the civilian's dot as they left the medical facility. Elena found herself walking next to one of the contractors, a middle-aged man who'd been quiet throughout. The tour, busy place today, he observed, his tone carefully neutral. Elena looked at him more carefully. Something about his bearing, the way he moved, suggested he wasn't just any contractor. Yes, very organized operation. The kind of organization that suggests they're expecting something specific, he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Elena's pulse quickened. This man was reading the same signs she was, which meant he had experience interpreting military readiness indicators. But was he friend or foe? I wouldn't know about that, she replied carefully. I'm just here for the tour. He smiled slightly. Of course. Just like I'm just here to inspect the electrical systems. The conversation ended there, But Elena was now certain that not everyone in the tour group was what they appeared to be. At least one other person was conducting reconnaissance under civilian cover, and possibly more. Her phone buzzed again. Another cryptic message. Storm front approaching. Recommend early departure. Elena's training kicked in fully now. Someone was definitely trying to warn her about an imminent threat, using code language that indicated they knew exactly who she really was. The question was whether this was a friendly warning or an attempt to manipulate her into a specific position. As the tour group gathered for their next stop, Elena made a decision. She would continue with the tour, maintain her cover, but she would also be ready for whatever was coming. Because her instincts were screaming that Fort Blackwater was about to become a very dangerous place to be. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the base, but Elena felt like darkness was approaching. Something was coming to Fort Blackwater, something that had military personnel quietly preparing for combat, while maintaining the facade of a routine day. And somehow, someone knew that Phantom was here. The tour's next destination was Hangar Charlie 9, one of Fort Blackwater's aircraft maintenance facilities. As the group walked across the tarmac, Elena found herself automatically scanning the horizon, a habit from years of operations where threats could materialize from any direction. The morning air carried the familiar sounds of military aviation, the whine of jet engines, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors, and the constant chatter of ground crews coordinating aircraft movements. This hangar houses some of our most advanced rotary wing aircraft, Park announced as they approached the massive structure. Unfortunately, due to operational security, we can only view the facility from designated areas. Elena noted the increased security presence immediately. What should have been a routine tour stop now featured armed guards at multiple checkpoints, and she counted at least 6 personnel whose positioning suggested overwatch duties rather than standard maintenance work. As they entered the hangar, Rebecca whispered to Elena, "Is it just me, or does everyone seem really tense today?" Elena had been wondering if any of the other civilians were picking up on the underlying tension. "Maybe they're preparing for an important exercise," she replied diplomatically, but Elena's attention was drawn to a cluster of helicopters that definitely weren't part of any standard maintenance rotation. 2 MH-6 Little Birds sat side by side, their weapon systems clearly visible despite covers thrown over sensitive equipment. These were special operations aircraft, the kind used for surgical strikes and rapid insertion missions. More concerning was the activity around them. Ground crews were performing pre-flight checks with the urgency that suggested imminent deployment, not routine maintenance. Elena recognized the signs. She'd seen them countless times before her own missions. "Those are some serious-looking helicopters," observed the young man considering military service. "Multi-role aircraft," Park replied carefully. "They can be configured for various mission types depending on operational requirements." Elena caught the eye of Master Sergeant Jake Riley, who was supervising the aircraft preparation. Riley was Delta Force. She could tell from his bearing, the way other personnel deferred to him, and most importantly, the quiet confidence that came from years of high-stakes operations. When their eyes met, she saw a flicker of recognition. That shouldn't have been there. Riley knew who she was. The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. Somehow, her carefully constructed civilian identity had been penetrated. Someone at Fort Blackwater knew that Elena Cross was actually Phantom, former Unit Shadow 6 operator with enough classified missions under her belt to fill a small library. She forced herself to maintain her civilian facade while her mind raced through possibilities. Had someone recognized her from old military databases? Was this a setup? Or was there a legitimate reason why Delta Force personnel might need to identify former Special Operations soldiers? "Ma'am?" Park had noticed her distraction again. "Are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale." "Just fascinated by the technology," Elena managed, gesturing toward the helicopters. I had no idea the military had such sophisticated equipment. But Park's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her performance. Military personnel were trained to spot inconsistencies, and Elena was beginning to worry that her cover was developing too. Many cracks to maintain. The suspicious contractor from earlier had positioned himself near one of the hangar's side exits, and Elena noticed he was taking far more interest in security measures than electrical systems. When he caught her watching him, he nodded slightly, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between professionals who recognized each other's true nature. As the tour continued, Elena's phone buzzed with another message. Package contents verified. Delivery team en route. 30 minutes. Her blood ran cold. In operational terminology, this suggested that hostile forces had confirmed their target and were approaching for an attack. The 30-minute timeline meant whatever was coming would happen soon, possibly before the civilian tour ended. Elena quickly scanned the hangar, noting exit routes and potential defensive positions. If Fort Blackwater was about to come under attack, the civilians would need protection, and she would need to decide whether to maintain her cover or reveal her true capabilities. The aircraft you're seeing today represent cutting-edge military aviation technology, Park was explaining to the group. These platforms can respond to threats anywhere in the world within hours of receiving orders. As if summoned by his words, Riley approached the tour group. Sergeant Park, we need to expedite the hangar tour. There's been a schedule change. The message was delivered professionally, but Elena caught the underlying urgency. Riley's eyes found hers again, and this time there was no mistaking the recognition. He knew exactly who she was, and he was trying to communicate something without compromising either of their positions. Of course, Sergeant Riley, Park replied, but Elena detected surprise in his voice. Schedule changes during civilian tours were unusual and suggested developing circumstances that required immediate attention. As they moved toward the hangar exit, Elena found herself walking near Riley, without breaking stride or looking directly at her. He spoke quietly. Ma'am, weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Recommend you stay close to covered positions. The warning was delivered in the same operational code language as the text messages. Riley was confirming that an attack was imminent and advising her to be ready for combat. But why? What did Delta Force know about her current situation that she didn't? Rebecca appeared at Elena's other side. Did he just warn you about something? That seemed like more than a weather update. Elena realized that her interactions with military personnel were becoming too obvious to ignore. The other civilians were starting to notice that she was receiving special attention, which could compromise everyone's safety if hostiles were monitoring the base. I think he was just being polite, Elena said, but she could see doubt in Rebecca's eyes. As they exited the hangar, Elena noticed that the base's activity level had increased dramatically. Personnel were moving with purpose rather than routine efficiency. Vehicles were being positioned in defensive configurations, and communication antennas that had been folded during peacetime operations were now fully extended. Fort Blackwater was quietly transitioning from normal operations to combat readiness, and someone wanted Elena to be aware of what was happening. Her phone buzzed one final time. Package delivery imminent. Phantom requested in receipt area. Authorization Tango 77. Elena's heart stopped. Tango 77 was an authentication code that only a handful of people in the world would know, people who had worked with her during the most classified operations of her career. Someone wasn't just aware of her presence at Fort Blackwater. They were officially requesting her assistance using protocols that belonged to a life she'd tried to leave behind. She looked around at the tour group, Rebecca with her suburban innocence, the young couple planning their futures, the historian documenting local military heritage. They had no idea that they were about to become collateral damage in whatever was approaching Fort Blackwater. Elena Cross, logistics consultant, would have found an excuse to leave immediately, prioritizing her own safety over strangers' welfare. But Phantom had never abandoned civilians in danger, and despite 3 years of trying to bury that identity, she couldn't start now. The facade was cracking beyond repair. Within minutes, she would have to choose between maintaining her carefully constructed anonymity and protecting innocent lives. As Park led the group toward their next destination, Elena realized that the choice had already been made. The moment she'd received that first cryptic warning, Phantom had begun to surface. Now, with hostiles inbound and civilians at risk, there was no going back to being ordinary. The tour would continue, but Elena Cross was about to disappear forever. At 10:47 hours, as Staff Sergeant Park was explaining the base's vehicle maintenance protocols near Building 15, the first explosion shattered the morning calm. The sound rolled across Fort Blackwater like thunder, followed immediately by the distinctive crack of automatic weapons fire. Elena's civilian facade evaporated instantly. While the other tour members stood frozen in confusion, she was already moving, her body responding to 20 years of combat conditioning before her mind had fully processed the threat. "Everyone down!" she shouted, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed under fire. The tour group dropped to the ground as a second explosion erupted from the direction of the main gate. Park was reaching for his radio when the base's emergency alarm system activated. The piercing wail filled the air, punctuated by an automated announcement. "Attention all personnel. Fort Blackwater is under attack. Repeat, Fort Blackwater is under attack. All units implement DEFCON 1 protocols immediately." Elena's mind shifted into tactical mode, automatically cataloging threats and assets. They were approximately 400 meters from the nearest hardened building, with limited cover between their current position and safety. The explosion suggested the attackers had breached the perimeter in at least 2 locations, likely using the classic pincer movement she'd encountered in hostile territory. "What's happening?" Rebecca cried, her voice high with panic. "We're under attack," Elena replied curtly, scanning the horizon for threats. "We need to move to secure shelter immediately." Park was struggling to raise base command on his radio, but Elena could hear the static that indicated communication jamming. Professional work. Whoever was attacking Fort Blackwater had come prepared for electronic warfare. A third explosion, much closer this time, sent debris raining down around them. Elena saw muzzle flashes from the tree line beyond the motor pool and counted at least 6 separate firing positions. The attackers were using coordinated small unit tactics, advancing under covering fire while maintaining disciplined spacing. "Sergeant Park," Elena called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Radios being jammed. We need to move these people to Building 12. It's hardened and has independent communications." Park stared at her in amazement. How did a civilian logistics consultant know about building classifications and communication systems? "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm, and I am calm," Elena interrupted, her eyes never leaving the approaching threats. "And I'm telling you that if we don't move right now, we're going to have casualties." As if to emphasize her point, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions simultaneously. The distinctive sound of AK-47s mixed with the heavier reports of squad automatic weapons. Elena recognized the audio signature. This wasn't random terrorism. These were professional soldiers using military-grade equipment. The Iron Wolves had come to Fort Blackwater. "Move, now!" Elena commanded, rising to a crouch and gesturing toward Building 12. "Stay low, move fast, and follow my lead." She began bounding toward cover, using the tactical movement patterns drilled into her during countless training exercises. Behind her, she could hear Park shouting at the civilians to follow the woman, who somehow knew exactly what she was doing. Rebecca stumbled beside Elena, her corporate attire completely unsuited for combat conditions. How do you know what to do?" She gasped. "Later," Elena replied, grabbing Rebecca's arm to keep her moving. "Right now, just run." They covered 50 meters before the first targeted fire found them. Bullets sparked off the concrete around their feet, and Elena instantly recognized the firing pattern. Single shooter, elevated position. Probably the communications tower they'd passed earlier in the tour. "Sniper, 2 o'clock." She called out, pushing Rebecca toward a concrete barrier. Everyone behind cover. Park looked at her with growing amazement. "Ma'am, how did you—" "I'll explain later." Elena snapped. "Right now, we need suppressive fire on that tower, or we're not making it to the building." Park's training kicked in, and he began returning fire with his sidearm while Elena assessed their tactical situation. 8 civilians plus 1 soldier. Minimal weapons, approximately 200 meters from safety, with at least 1 sniper and multiple ground assault teams converging on their position. In her former life, these would have been acceptable odds for Phantom and her team. As Elena Cross, logistics consultant, it was a death sentence. The choice was made for her when she saw the young couple who'd been considering military careers caught in the open, frozen with terror as automatic weapons fire erupted around them. The woman had fallen, clutching her ankle. While her boyfriend tried desperately to help her move, Elena didn't hesitate. She sprinted from cover, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years navigating hostile fire. She reached the couple in seconds, scooped up the injured woman in a fireman's carry, and began directing the boyfriend toward safety. "Stay behind me," she ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "When I say move, you run exactly where I point. Don't think, just go." Bullets whined overhead as Elena bounded between cover positions, using terrain and obstacles to mask their movement from the sniper. Her body moved automatically, muscle memory guiding her through evasion patterns she'd practiced thousands of times. Park was providing covering fire, but Elena could see his ammunition was running low. More concerning, she spotted movement in the distance that suggested the main assault force was approaching their position. They had maybe 2 minutes before being overrun. "Park," she called out, "conserve your ammo. I'm going to get us to that building, but I need you to cover our final approach." "Roger," he replied, and Elena noticed he'd stopped questioning her authority. Combat had a way of revealing people's true nature, and Park was smart enough to recognize competence when he saw it. Elena gathered the civilians behind the largest concrete barrier. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had once commanded special operations teams. "We're going to move as a group to Building 12. Stay low, stay together, and do exactly what I tell you when I tell you to do it." The elderly historian looked at her with sudden understanding. "You're military, aren't you? Not logistics, something else." Elena met his eyes for a moment. There was no point in maintaining the fiction anymore. Former military. But right. Now that doesn't matter. What matters is getting you people to safety. Rebecca grabbed Elena's arm. What kind of former military moves like that? Before Elena could answer, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. But instead of the comfort of friendly air support, she recognized the signature of aircraft that didn't belong to Fort Blackwater's inventory. The Iron Wolves had brought air assets. "We need to move now," Elena said grimly. "Those helicopters will be carrying reinforcements, and this position is about to become untenable." As she prepared to lead the group on their final sprint to safety, Elena caught sight of Master Sergeant Riley advancing toward their position with a small team of Delta Force operators. Even at this distance, she could see him moving with the practiced efficiency of elite special operations. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and Riley gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement. The message was clear. Help was coming, but the civilians were her responsibility until they reached safety. Elena looked back at the terrified faces depending on her leadership. 3 years of hiding were over. Elena Cross was gone, and Phantom had returned to the fight. "Stay close and trust me," she told them. "We're going home." Elena led the sprint toward Building 12 with the precision of someone who'd navigated hostile territory for 2 decades. She moved in calculated bounds, using vehicles and concrete barriers as cover, while constantly assessing threats from multiple vectors. Behind her, 8 terrified civilians followed, her lead with the desperate trust of people who understood their survival depended entirely on her expertise. Bounding Overwatch, Elena called to Park, using terminology that made him stare at her in amazement. "Cover our movement to the blue sedan, then I'll cover your advance." Park responded automatically, his military training taking over despite his confusion about who this civilian consultant really was. He provided suppressive fire toward the communications tower, while Elena moved the group forward in tactical formation. The injured woman, whose name Elena had learned was Sarah, was struggling despite her boyfriend's support. Elena made a quick decision and took her full weight, carrying her while directing the others. Movement with hand signals that any special operations soldier would recognize instantly. "How do you know those signals?" whispered the historian, who was proving remarkably calm under fire. 20 years of practice," Elena replied grimly, scanning for the next covered position. "Move to that concrete pillar when I give the signal." Automatic weapons fire erupted from their left flank as 3 Iron Wolves soldiers emerged from behind the motor pool. Elena instantly recognized their formation and equipment. These weren't militia or terrorists. They were professional military contractors, moving with the discipline and coordination that came from extensive training. "Contact left," she shouted, pushing the civilians toward cover while drawing tactical assessments from muscle memory. "Park, 3 hostiles at your 10 o'clock, approximately 100 meters. Elena's mind automatically calculated firing angles, cover positions, and movement patterns. She could see exactly how the engagement would unfold. The attackers would attempt to flank while maintaining suppressive fire, forcing the defenders into an increasingly narrow corridor that could be easily targeted by the sniper. "We need to break contact," she told Park during a brief lull in the firing. "They're herding us into a kill zone." Park stared at her with growing realization. "Ma'am, you're talking like someone who's done this before," Elena finished. "Because I have. Many times." She turned to address the civilians directly, her voice carrying the calm authority that had once commanded teens in the world's most dangerous places. "I need you to listen very carefully. I'm going to create a distraction that will allow us to reach the building safely. When I give the signal, you run directly to that entrance and don't look back." Rebecca grabbed her arm. "What kind of distraction? You're not military anymore. You said former military." Elena met her eyes with the steady gaze of someone who'd made life-and-death decisions under pressure countless times. "Former doesn't mean forgotten." Before anyone could protest, Elena was moving. She bounded away from the group with a speed and fluidity that left no doubt about her true nature. She covered ground like a predator, using terrain and obstacles to mask her approach toward the Iron Wolves. Position. Park watched in amazement as the quiet civilian consultant transformed into something entirely different. Her movement patterns, her tactical awareness, her command presence, everything screamed special operations at the highest level. "Who is she?" he muttered, but there was no time for answers. Elena reached a position that gave her a clear angle on the attacker's flank. Without weapons, she couldn't engage directly, but she could certainly disrupt their formation. She began moving between covered positions, creating noise and movement that forced the hostiles to divide their attention. The tactic worked perfectly. Confused by threats from an unexpected vector, the Iron Wolf soldiers hesitated just long enough for Elena to signal the civilians toward safety. "Go, now," she shouted, and the group sprinted toward Building 12 while she continued drawing fire away from their escape route. Master Sergeant Riley and his Delta Force team reached Elena's position just as she completed her distraction maneuver. Riley moved with the lethal efficiency that marked him as elite special operations, but even he seemed impressed by what he'd witnessed. "Outstanding work," he said, offering Elena a spare sidearm. "Phantom, I presume?" Elena accepted the weapon with the automatic weapons check that identified her as someone intimately familiar with firearms. "Call sign confirmed. What's the tactical situation?" Riley's expression shifted to one of professional respect. "Iron Wolves hit us with 12 operators in 3 teams. They've breached the perimeter at 2 points and are moving toward the command center. Primary objective appears to be intelligence acquisition." Elena processed this information while maintaining awareness of their immediate surroundings. "Assets?" "Delta team of 6 operators, plus base security forces. Response time for additional support is 20 minutes minimum." Elena looked toward Building 12, where the civilians had reached safety. Park was standing in the doorway, staring back at her with complete bewilderment. The quiet logistics consultant who'd been asking polite questions about base operations was now conducting tactical briefings with Delta Force personnel. "The civilians are secure," she reported. "What do you need from me?" Riley studied her face with the measuring gaze of someone evaluating a potential team member. "Honestly, we could use someone with your experience. The Iron Wolves are using tactics that suggest they have intelligence about our defensive measures. This feels like an inside job." Elena's mind immediately began analyzing the implications. If the attackers had inside information, it explained their sophisticated approach and precise timing. It also meant the base's security had been compromised at a level that could affect ongoing operations. "The contractor on the tour," she said. Suddenly, middle-aged man claimed to be inspecting electrical systems. He was reading security measures too carefully. Riley nodded grimly. "We had the same suspicion. He disappeared during the initial attack, probably providing real-time intelligence to the assault teams." Elena felt the familiar surge of tactical awareness that had defined her operational career. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, revealing a complex operation designed to extract classified intelligence while minimizing military casualties that might trigger international incidents. "This isn't random," she said. "They're after something specific, probably in the command center. The civilian tour was cover for reconnaissance, and the attack is precisely timed to exploit gaps in security protocols." Riley's respect for her analysis was evident. "That matches our assessment. The question is, are you willing to help us stop them?" Elena looked back at Building 12, where 8 innocent civilians were depending on decisions made by people they'd never met. Then she looked at the base around her, where soldiers were risking their lives to protect national security interests that most Americans would never know existed. 3 years ago, she'd walked away from this life because politics and bureaucracy had made it unbearable. But politics and bureaucracy weren't attacking Fort Blackwater today. Professional soldiers with unclear motives were threatening innocent lives in classified operations. The choice was easier than she'd expected. "What's the plan?" Elena asked, checking her weapons magazine with movements that demonstrated decades of combat experience. Riley smiled for the first time since the attack began. "Welcome back to the fight, Phantom." As they prepared to move toward the command center, Elena realized that Elena Cross, logistics consultant, had been a fiction that served its purpose for 3 years. But fiction had its limitations when real threats required real responses. Phantom was back, and the Iron Wolves were about to discover why her former unit had called her the most dangerous operator they'd ever produced. Riley led Elena and his Delta Force team through Fort Blackwater's service corridors, moving with the silent efficiency that separated elite operators from conventional soldiers. Elena found herself automatically falling into formation, her body remembering patterns she'd practiced thousands of times with Unit Shadow 6. Sitrup, Riley spoke quietly into his throat mic. We're moving to intercept the primary assault team. Eta to command center. 4 minutes. Elena's tactical awareness had sharpened to the level she'd maintained during her most dangerous operations. Every sound, every shadow, every change in air pressure registered in her consciousness. 3 years of civilian life hadn't dulled her. Edget had simply compressed it like a spring waiting for release. Contact front, whispered Sergeant First Class Kevin Thompson, Riley's point man. He held up a closed fist, freezing the team in place. Elena immediately identified the threat. 2 iron Wolves soldiers positioned to cover the corridor leading to the command center. Their positioning showed professional training overlapping. Fields of fire, mutual support, clear communication lines to their headquarters element. Riley looked at Elena with a question in his eyes. She nodded once, understanding his unspoken request. Without words, they developed a plan that relied on the kind of tactical telepathy that came from years of high-stakes operations. Elena moved like smoke, through the building's structural shadows, using maintenance alcoves and equipment rooms to approach the hostiles from an unexpected angle. Her movement was so fluid, so perfectly silent, that even Thompson, a man who'd spent 15 years in special operations, found himself straining to track her progress. Jesus, he whispered to Riley. Who is this woman? Someone who makes. Yous look like amateurs, Riley replied, watching Elena position herself for the takedown. Elena struck with the precision that had earned her the call sign Phantom. The first Iron Wolf soldier never knew what hit him. Elena's takedown was so swift and silent that his partner didn't realize anything was wrong until Elena's hand covered his mouth and pressure points along his neck sent him into unconsciousness. Both hostiles were neutralized without a sound, their weapons secured, their radios disabled. Elena signaled the all-clear with hand gestures that demonstrated mastery of tactical communication protocols. Riley and his team moved up to her position, their expressions mixing professional admiration with genuine amazement. 2 hostiles neutralized, no alerts sent, Elena reported quietly. Their communication gear suggests they're maintaining contact with a command element approximately every 3 minutes. Thompson stared at her. How did you move that quietly? I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone. Different training, Elena replied simply. Unit Shadow 6 developed some unique approaches to close-quarters work. Riley's eyes widened. Unit Shadow 6 was legendary, even among special operations communities. Units so classified that most Delta operators had only heard rumors about their capabilities. Elena's casual reference to specialized training explained everything and nothing simultaneously. Ma'am, Thompson said with genuine respect, what the hell were you doing working in logistics? Elena checked the captured weapons, ensuring they were functional before distributing ammunition to the team. Trying to be someone I'm not. They continued toward the command center, but Elena's awareness picked up details that troubled her. The Iron Wolves' equipment was too sophisticated, their tactics too precise, their intelligence about Fort Blackwater's layout too accurate. This wasn't just professional military contracting. This was state-sponsored operation with resources. That suggested major backing. Riley, she said quietly, these aren't freelance operators. Someone with significant resources planned this operation. What makes you say that? Elena pointed to communication equipment they'd captured from the neutralized hostiles. This gear is cutting-edge electronic warfare technology. Military-grade encryption, real-time tactical networks, integrated with satellite communication systems. The Iron Wolves don't have this kind of budget. Riley examined the equipment with growing concern. Foreign intelligence? Or domestic contractors? With classification levels that let them access restricted technology, Elena replied. Either way, we're dealing with opponents who know exactly what they're doing. As they approached the command center, Elena's tactical instincts identified the pattern of the attack. The Iron Wolves weren't trying to cause maximum casualties or destroy infrastructure. They were conducting a surgical intelligence extraction operation designed to acquire specific classified information while minimizing international complications. "They're after something in the command center," she told Riley. "Probably digital intelligence plans, operational details, personnel information. The attack is cover for espionage." Riley nodded grimly. "That matches what we suspected. The question is, what intelligence is worth this level of risk?" Elena's mind immediately went to the Ghost Hawk program she'd observed during the tour. Experimental aircraft technology, advanced tactical systems, classified operational protocols, all valuable targets for foreign intelligence or corporate espionage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They reached the final corridor before the command center, where Elena's enhanced awareness detected something that made her blood run cold. The silence was wrong, too complete, too controlled. Professional soldiers maintaining perfect noise discipline while moving through occupied space. "Ambush," she whispered, holding up a warning hand. Riley immediately signaled his team to halt. "How many?" Elena closed her eyes, using senses sharpened by 20 years of survival. "In hostile territory." Air currents, microscopic vibrations, the almost imperceptible sound of controlled breathing. 4 operators positioned for crossfire. "They know we're coming." Thompson looked at her with amazement. "How can you possibly experience?" Elena replied simply. "The kind that keeps you alive when conventional tactics get you killed." Riley studied the tactical situation. 4 Iron Wolf soldiers in prepared positions, superior firepower, knowledge of their approach route. In conventional terms, it was a nearly impossible scenario. "Recommendations?" he asked Elena. Elena's smile was predatory, carrying echoes of operations that existed only in classified files. "Conventional approach gets us killed. Time for something unconventional." She began moving through the building's infrastructure, ventilation systems, maintenance spaces, architectural features that most people never noticed. Elena had spent her career finding ways to appear where enemies least expected, moving through environments like a ghost. Riley watched her disappear into shadows that shouldn't have provided concealment, using spaces that shouldn't have allowed human passage. His Delta Force training was extensive, but Elena operated on a different level entirely. "Thompson," he whispered into his mic, "remind me never to play hide-and-seek with that woman." Elena's voice came through their communication system from an impossible location. "Hostiles are focused on your approach vector. I'm repositioning for rear engagement. Give me 30 seconds, then create noise from your position." Riley had worked with the best operators in the world, but Elena's tactical innovation was in a class by itself. She wasn't just skilled, she was creative, turning every environment into an advantage through approaches that conventional training never covered. "Phantom," he said quietly, "you're cleared for engagement." Elena's response carried the calm confidence of someone who'd faced impossible odds countless times. "Roger. Time to remind them why they call me Phantom." The Iron Wolves were about to discover that their intelligence about Fort Blackwater's defenses had missed one crucial detail. Sometimes the most dangerous operator in the building was the one nobody saw coming. Elena emerged from the ventilation system directly above the Iron Wolves' ambush position, moving through spaces that shouldn't have accommodated a human body. 20 years of unconventional warfare had taught her to exploit architectural features that conventional soldiers never considered tactical assets. She positioned herself with the patience of someone who'd spent days waiting for the perfect shot, studying the 4 hostiles below through microscopic gaps in the ceiling infrastructure. Their formation was textbook: overlapping fields of fire, mutual support, clear communication protocols. Professional work that would have eliminated most assault teams, but Elena wasn't most operators. "Phantom in position," she whispered into her throat mic. 4 hostiles confirmed, preparing for simultaneous engagement. Rayleigh's voice crackled back, "Standing by for your signal." Elena drew her sidearm and checked the magazine one final time. 4 targets, unknown body armor, limited ammunition, 0 margin for error. The mathematics of combat that had defined her operational career. She moved with the fluid precision that had earned her legendary status in Unit Shadow 6, the first Iron Wolves. Soldier never knew death was coming. Elena's shot was placed with surgical accuracy, targeting the gap between helmet and body armor that most operators never noticed. The second hostile turned toward the sound of his teammates, collapsed just as Elena dropped through the ceiling tiles like a predator descending on prey. Her combat knife found its target before he could raise his weapon, the takedown so swift and silent that the remaining 2 soldiers were still focused on Riley's approach vector. Elena's third engagement was a masterpiece of tactical timing. As the hostile turned to investigate the disturbance behind him, she struck from an angle that physics textbooks would have declared impossible. Her movement patterns defied conventional understanding of human mobility in combat situations. The 4th soldier managed to raise his weapon before Elena's final strike, but 20 years of life or death encounters had given her reflexes that operated faster than conscious thought. She neutralized the threat with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Riley and his team moved up to find 4 Iron Wolves soldiers down and Elena standing in the center of their position, checking their equipment with the clinical efficiency of someone conducting post-mission intelligence gathering. 4 hostiles neutralized, she reported. No shots fired, no alerts transmitted. Their communication logs show contact with command elements scheduled in 90 seconds. Thompson stared at the scene with undisguised amazement. "Ma'am, I just watched you take down 4 professional soldiers in less than 30 seconds. That's not just training, that's something else entirely." Elena was already moving toward the command center entrance, her mind focused on the mission rather than explanations. Different wars require different skills. But Riley understood exactly what Thompson was struggling to process. Elena hadn't just demonstrated superior combat capabilities, she'd operated on a level that redefined their understanding of what individual operators could accomplish. Her tactics weren't just unconventional. They were revolutionary. "Phantom," Riley said quietly, "in 15 years of special operations, I've never seen anything like what you just did." Elena paused at the command center door, studying the electronic locks and security measures that protected Fort Blackwater's most sensitive operations. Unit Shadow 6 developed techniques for scenarios where conventional tactics meant certain failure. When you're always outnumbered and outgunned, you learn to make the impossible look routine. She approached the security panel with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with military electronic systems. Her fingers moved across the keypad with practiced efficiency, inputting codes that suggested knowledge far beyond what any civilian consultant should possess. "How do you know the access codes?" Thompson asked. "Because I helped design these security protocols," Elena replied simply. Shadow 6 operators needed access to classified facilities during joint operations. Some clearances never expire. The door opened with a soft electronic chime, revealing Fort Blackwater's command center in all its technological sophistication. Banks of computer terminals displayed tactical information. Communication systems maintained contact with units worldwide, and classified databases contained intelligence that could shift global power balances. But the command center wasn't empty. 3 Iron Wolves operators were working at computer terminals, downloading data with the systematic efficiency of professionals conducting intelligence extraction. They looked up as Elena and Riley's team entered, their expressions showing surprise that quickly shifted to combat readiness. "Contact front," Riley called out, but Elena was already moving. What happened next would become legendary among special operations communities for years to come. Elena engaged 3 armed hostiles in close-quarters combat within a space filled with sensitive electronic equipment, neutralizing all threats without damaging a single computer system. Her movements were a symphony of tactical precision strikes, placed with millimeter accuracy, defensive actions that turned the environment into weapons, combat techniques that utilized every surface and angle to maximum advantage. She fought like someone who'd redefined the possibilities of human combat capability. Riley and his team could only watch as Elena dismantled the Iron Wolves' final assault element with skills that transcended normal special operations training. She moved through the engagement like physics laws were suggestions rather than rules, appearing where enemies least expected while striking from angles they couldn't anticipate. "Sweet Jesus," Thompson whispered. "Is she even human?" When the engagement ended, 3 Iron Wolf soldiers lay unconscious or neutralized, their weapons secured, their data extraction equipment disabled. Elena stood among the computer terminals, checking systems for damage with the methodical thoroughness of someone who understood exactly what each piece of equipment represented. "Command center secured," she reported. "Intelligence extraction interrupted, but we need to determine what data was compromised." Riley approached one of the computer terminals where the hostiles had been working. They were accessing personnel files, operational plans, and technical specifications for classified programs. Elena studied the screen, her expression darkening, as she recognized the specific files being targeted. They were after Ghost Hawk program data, technical specifications, test results, tactical applications, everything needed to reproduce or counter our most advanced aircraft systems. The implications hit Riley immediately. Foreign intelligence or corporate espionage. Either way, someone with significant resources wanted this information badly enough to risk a direct assault on a major military installation. Elena's voice carried the grim assessment of someone who'd seen similar operations before. This wasn't random, it was surgical intelligence extraction with specific objectives. Thompson was still staring at Elena with undisguised awe. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely?" Elena nodded. "I've worked with the best operators in the world. SEALs, Delta Force, SAS, French Foreign Legion. What you just did, that's not normal. That's something beyond normal." Elena looked around the command center, at the sophisticated systems she'd once helped protect, at the classified information that represented years of American technological advancement. Normal gets people killed when the stakes are this high. Shadow 6 trained for scenarios where normal wasn't enough. Rayleigh's radio crackled with updates from base security. "All Iron Wolves elements neutralized or in custody. Base is secure." "Outstanding work, sir." As they prepared to conduct post-mission procedures, Elena realized that something fundamental had changed. She was no longer Elena Cross, the civilian trying to forget her past. She was Phantom again, and the skills that had defined her operational career were as sharp as ever. But more importantly, she'd remembered why those skills mattered. As base security teams arrived to process the captured Iron Wolves operatives, Elena found herself standing in the command center, staring at classified displays that brought back memories she'd spent 3 years trying to suppress. The familiar hum of tactical communications, the organized chaos of military operations, the weight of decisions that could affect national security, all of it crashed over her like a wave. "Phantom," Riley said quietly, approaching her position near the key main tactical display. "Command wants a full debrief in 30 minutes. General Stone is flying in from the Pentagon, specifically to speak with you." Elena's stomach tightened. General Victoria Stone, a name from her past that carried both respect and painful associations. Stone had been Colonel Stone when Elena's career imploded, one of the few senior officers who tried to protect her from the political fallout that destroyed Unit Shadow 6. "What does she want?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Answers," Riley replied. "About what happened today. About why a civilian consultant moves like the most dangerous operator any of us have ever seen. And about why someone with your capabilities has been hiding in logistics consulting for 3 years. Thompson appeared. Beside them, carrying equipment recovered from the Iron Wolves communication systems. "Ma'am, we've been analyzing their gear. This stuff is next-level quantum encryption, real-time tactical networking, integrated satellite uplinks. Whoever backed this operation has resources that rival major military powers." Elena studied the equipment, her analytical mind automatically cataloging technical specifications and operational implications. "The encryption protocols are modified versions of systems I helped develop for Shadow 6. Someone reverse-engineered classified technology for this operation." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The Iron Wolves hadn't just attacked Fort Blackwater, they'd used corrupted versions of her own innovations to do it. Technology she'd developed to protect American interests had been twisted into tools for intelligence theft. "Riley," she said grimly, "I need to see their complete communication logs. If they're using modified Shadow 6 protocols, I might be able to trace the source of their intelligence." As Elena worked through the captured data, memories she'd tried to bury began surfacing with painful clarity. Unit Shadow 6, the most classified special operations unit in American military history. Missions that existed only in heavily redacted files. Operations that had saved thousands of lives while remaining completely invisible to public knowledge, and the betrayal that had destroyed it all. "Ma'am?" Thompson had noticed her growing tension. "Are you all right?" Elena forced herself to focus on the present situation. "I'm fine. Just recognizing some technical signatures that I hoped I'd never see again." But she wasn't fine. The Iron Wolves attack had torn open wounds that 3 years of civilian anonymity hadn't healed. Elena Cross, logistics consultant, had been a comfortable fiction that let her avoid confronting the choices that had ended her operational career. But Phantom couldn't hide from the truth. Staff Sergeant Park appeared in the command center, his expression mixing confusion with growing understanding. He'd watched Elena transform from a quiet tour participant into someone who commanded respect from Delta Force operators, a transformation that demanded explanation. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "the civilian tour group is asking about you. They want to know if you're safe and when they'll see you again." Elena looked toward the building where 8 innocent people were waiting for answers she couldn't give. Rebecca, the corporate executive who'd treated her like a friend, the young couple planning their future together, the historian who'd seen through her facade. All of them looking to Elena Cross for reassurance that their world made sense. But Elena Cross was gone, replaced by someone whose world operated according to different rules entirely. "Tell them I'm coordinating with base security about additional safety measures," Elena said finally. "They'll be debriefed and released as soon as the situation is completely secure." Park nodded, but his eyes carried questions that Elena wasn't ready to answer. "How did you explain that the quiet woman asking polite questions about military logistics was actually a legendary special operations soldier whose existence was classified at levels most people never heard about?" Riley's radio crackled with an update. "General Stone's aircraft is inbound, ETA 15 minutes. She wants the debrief conducted in Building 23, Conference Room Alpha." Building 23, where Elena's morning had started with a simple civilian tour. That was supposed to help her find closure with her military past. Instead, it had forced her to confront everything she'd been running from for 3 years. "I need some air," Elena said. Walking toward the command center's exit, she found herself on Fort Blackwater's main plaza, where the morning's chaos had been replaced by the controlled activity of post-incident operations. Medical teams were treating minor injuries, security personnel were securing evidence, and life was slowly returning to normal patterns. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be normal again. Thompson found her there, standing in the shadow of the flagpole where the American flag snapped in the afternoon breeze. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am," Elena nodded. "I've been in special operations for 15 years, Thompson said. "I've worked with the best soldiers America has ever produced. But what you did today, that wasn't just superior training. That was something else entirely." Elena stared at the flag, remembering the oath she'd taken 23 years ago when she'd first enlisted. To support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. To bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Unit Shadow 6 operated in situations where conventional tactics meant certain failure, she said quietly. "We developed techniques for scenarios where success seemed impossible and failure meant catastrophic consequences." "What happened to the unit?" Thompson asked. Elena's expression hardened with old pain. "Politics. Someone decided that our methods were too unconventional, too dangerous, too independent. Questions were raised about accountability, oversight, operational boundaries. The kind of questions that bureaucrats ask when they're more concerned with covering their careers than protecting national security." Thompson studied her face. "And you were the scapegoat." "I was the commanding officer when everything fell apart," Elena replied. 12 of the best operators America ever produced, disbanded and scattered to conventional units because someone in Washington decided we were too effective for our own good. The words carried 3 years of suppressed anger and regret. Elena had built Elena Cross as a way to escape the political machinery that had destroyed her team, but the escape had been incomplete. The guilt, the sense of abandonment, the knowledge that her operators had been punished for her leadership decisions, all of it had followed her into civilian life. "Ma'am," Thompson said carefully, "what you accomplished today suggests that maybe it's time to stop hiding." Elena looked back toward the command center, where Riley was probably preparing briefing materials for General Stone. In 15 minutes, she would have to answer questions about choices she'd made, decisions she'd tried to forget, and capabilities she'd hoped never to use again. The comfortable fiction of Elena Cross was over. The question now was whether Phantom could find a way forward that honored both who she'd been and who she'd tried to become. The flag snapped in the breeze above them, and Elena realized that some oaths transcended politics, bureaucracy, and personal pain. Today, when innocent lives were threatened and national security was compromised, she'd remembered what really mattered. The meeting with General Stone would determine whether that remembrance led to redemption or simply reopened old wounds that had never properly healed. General Victoria Stone entered conference room, alpha with the bearing of someone who'd spent 30 years making decisions that shaped American military policy. Her uniform displayed ribbons that told stories of deployments, operations, and commands that spanned multiple conflicts. But her eyes, when they found Elena's, carried the weight of shared history that transcended rank and protocol. "Captain Cross," Stone said formally, then paused. "Or should I say Major Cross? Your promotion was processed before Unit Shadow 6 was disbanded, though I don't believe you were ever officially notified." Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "General, I've been a civilian for 3 years. According to military records, you've been on extended leave pending reassignment," Stone replied, settling into the chair across from Elena. "Bureaucratic oversight, perhaps. Or maybe someone wanted to keep options open." Riley and Thompson flanked Elena at the conference table, their presence both protective and supportive. Colonel Marcus Webb, Fort Blackwater's commanding officer, completed the group, his expression suggesting he was still processing the day's revelations. "Let's start with today's events," Stone said, opening a tablet that undoubtedly contained classified briefing materials. 12 Iron Wolves operatives conducted a coordinated assault on Fort Blackwater with the apparent objective of extracting Ghost Hawk program intelligence. They were neutralized by base security forces with assistance from a civilian consultant, who demonstrated capabilities that defy conventional explanation. Elena remained silent, understanding that Stone was building towards something more complex than a simple debrief. Master Sergeant Rayleigh reports that this civilian consultant moved like the most advanced special operations soldier he'd encountered in 15 years of elite service. She neutralized multiple hostiles using techniques that suggested training beyond any known military program. And she accessed classified systems using credentials that should have been revoked years ago. Stone's gaze never left Elena's face. Care to explain how a logistics consultant acquired such remarkable skills? Elena looked around the table at faces that represented different aspects of her military career. Rayleigh and Thompson, who'd witnessed her capabilities firsthand. Webb, who commanded the base she'd helped protect. And Stone, who'd been there when everything fell apart. "General, you know exactly who I am and what I used to do." "What I know," Stone replied, "is that Major Elena Cross commanded Unit Shadow 6 during some of the most successful classified operations in recent military history. What I also know is that political pressure forced the disbanding of that unit after questions were raised about operational oversight and accountability." Stone paused, her expression softening slightly. "What I've wondered for 3 years is whether we made a catastrophic mistake." The admission hung in the air like a revelation. Elena had spent 3 years believing that her military career ended because she'd failed to navigate political realities. The possibility that higher command had regretted their decision had never occurred to her. "General," Elena said carefully, "Shadow 6 was disbanded because our methods were deemed too unconventional for modern military oversight requirements." "Shadow 6 was disbanded," Stone corrected, "because Congressman Harold Fitzpatrick needed a scapegoat for intelligence failures that had nothing to do with your unit. He used your success against you, claiming that unsupervised special operations posed risks to democratic oversight." Elena felt 3 years of guilt and self-doubt beginning to crack. The review board concluded. "What political pressure demanded they conclude?" Stone interrupted. "But today's events have demonstrated something important. When genuine threats emerge, conventional responses aren't always sufficient." Rayleigh leaned forward. "General, if I may, what Major Cross accomplished today wasn't just superior tactics. She redefined what individual operators can achieve in complex scenarios." Thompson nodded agreement. "Ma'am, I've worked with every elite unit in the American military. Major Cross operates on a level that's simply different from normal special operations." Stone smiled slightly. "Which brings us to the real purpose of this meeting." She activated her tablet, displaying classified organizational charts that made Elena's pulse quicken. The Defense Department has been quietly developing a new special operations capability, something that learns from past mistakes while leveraging exceptional individual talents. Elena studied the displayed information, recognizing operational concepts that resembled Shadow 6 methodologies, but with enhanced oversight and political insulation. "You're reconstituting Shadow 6, Elena said. "We're creating something better," Stone replied. "Unit Ghost Protocol, small teams of exceptional operators working classified missions with appropriate oversight and clear command authority. No political interference, no bureaucratic second-guessing, no scapegoating when missions succeed too well." The offer was implicit but unmistakable. Elena could return to operational status, command operators with capabilities similar to her former team, and conduct missions that actually mattered for national security. "What's the catch?" Elena asked. Stone's expression grew serious. "Today's attack wasn't random. The Iron Wolves were specifically targeting Ghost Hawk program data, and their intelligence about Fort Blackwater's defenses was suspiciously accurate. Someone with inside access provided operational support." Elena felt the familiar chill of recognition. Insider threat, More than that, Stone continued. Someone with knowledge of your presence here, your true identity, and your operational capabilities. The timing of this attack, coinciding with your visit, suggests coordinated intelligence. Gathering. Riley's expression darkened. You think someone knew Phantom would be here? I think someone wanted to test whether Major Cross still possessed her legendary capabilities, Stone replied. The question is, why? Elena's mind raced through possibilities, each more concerning than the last. If someone had orchestrated today's events to evaluate her current status, it suggested planning that extended far beyond simple intelligence theft. General, Elena said slowly, if Unit Ghost Protocol is being established, and today's attack was designed to assess my capabilities, then someone is preparing for operations that require Shadow 6 level responses. Stone nodded grimly. That's our assessment. Which is why we need operators like you back in service before whoever planned today's test decides to escalate. Elena looked around the table again, but this time she saw something different. Not judges evaluating their past failures, but colleagues preparing for future missions. People who understood that some threats required exceptional responses. What would my role be? Elena asked. Team leader for Ghost Protocol's primary element, Stone replied. You'd select your own operators, develop mission protocols, and report directly to Joint Special Operations Command. Complete operational authority within your area of responsibility. It was everything Elena had wanted when Shadow 6 was dissolved. Chance to lead again, to make a difference, to use her skills for purposes that mattered. But it also meant leaving behind the safety of civilian anonymity. I need to think about it, Elena said. Stone smiled. Take all the time you need. But Elena, today you remembered who you really are. The question now is whether you're ready to stop hiding from it. As the meeting concluded, Elena realized that the comfortable fiction of Elena Cross had been dying all morning. The Iron Wolves attack had simply delivered the final blow. Now she had to decide whether Phantom would rise from those ashes or remain buried forever. The choice, for the first time in 3 years, was entirely hers. 6 hours after the Iron Wolves attack on Fort Blackwater, Elena stood in the same waiting area where her morning had begun with such innocent intentions. But everything had changed. The civilian tour group had been debriefed and released. The base had returned to normal operations, and Elena Cross, logistics consultant and anonymous civilian, had ceased to exist. Rebecca Torres found her there, clutching a visitor's badge that would soon be surrendered along with the fiction that had brought her to Fort Blackwater. Elena? Rebecca's voice carried confusion and concern. The security officers told us you were helping with the investigation. But they wouldn't explain what happened to you during the attack. 1 minute you were on the tour with us, and the next you disappeared into some kind of military operation. Elena looked at the woman who'd tried to befriend her during those innocent hours before everything changed. Rebecca represented the civilian world Elena had inhabited for 3 years, comfortable, predictable, safe. A world where the most dangerous decisions involved quarterly reports and supply chain logistics. Rebecca, Elena said carefully, there are things about today that I can't explain. Things about me that I couldn't tell you before. The security officer called you Major, Rebecca said quietly. And when I asked Staff Sergeant Park about you, he looked at me like I'd asked about some kind of legend. Who are you really? Elena realized that this conversation represented the final bridge between her past and future. Rebecca deserved honesty, even if that honesty revealed uncomfortable truths about friendship built on deception. I'm someone who spent 20 years serving my country in ways that most people never know about, Elena said. Someone who tried to become a civilian and discovered that some identities can't be permanently buried. Rebecca studied Elena's face with the perceptive intelligence that had made her successful in corporate environments. You're military, not former military, active military. As of 6 hours ago, yes. The admission felt like stepping across a threshold that couldn't be recrossed. Elena Cross, the woman Rebecca had met during a civilian tour, was officially gone. Major Elena Cross, soon to be commander of Unit Ghost Protocol, stood in her place. "Will I see you again?" Rebecca asked. Elena's smile carried genuine warmth mixed with regret. "I don't know. My work tends to keep me away from normal civilian interactions." They said goodbye with the awkwardness of people who'd shared genuine connection under false pretenses. Rebecca left with answers that weren't really answers, and Elena remained with choices that would define the rest of her life. Riley appeared in the waiting area as Rebecca's car disappeared beyond the main gate. "Major, General Stone wants to know if you've made your decision." Elena looked around Fort Blackwater one final time as a civilian. The buildings where she'd spent her morning, asking polite questions about military operations. The plaza where she'd stood remembering oaths that transcended personal comfort. The command center where she'd rediscovered capabilities she'd tried to forget. "Tell the general that Major Cross reports for duty," Elena said. Riley's grin was immediate and genuine. "Outstanding. Thompson's going to be thrilled. He's been hoping you'd say yes since the moment he watched you take down those Iron Wolves operatives." 2 weeks later, Elena stood in a classified briefing room at an undisclosed location, addressing a hand-picked team of operators who'd volunteered for Unit Ghost Protocol. The faces around the table represented the best special operations soldiers. America had produced men and women whose capabilities matched their dedication to missions that would never receive public recognition. Ghost Protocol operates on principles learned from past successes and failures, Elena told them. "We conduct operations that conventional forces can't handle, using methods that traditional oversight can't accommodate. But we operate with complete transparency within our command structure and absolute accountability for our actions." Master Sergeant Jake Riley had accepted transfer to Ghost Protocol as Elena's second-in-command. Staff Sergeant Kevin Thompson had requested assignment despite having 2 years remaining on his current Delta Force commitment. They'd been joined by operators from every branch of special operations, united by recognition that some missions required exceptional capabilities. "Our first operational deployment begins in 72 hours. Elena continued. "Intelligence suggests that the Iron Wolves' attack on Fort Blackwater was part of a larger operation targeting classified American defense technologies. We're going to find out who's behind it and ensure they understand the consequences of threatening American interests." As she briefed her team on mission parameters, Elena realized that she'd finally found the balance between who she'd been and who she'd tried to become. Elena Cross had represented escape from responsibility and consequence. Phantom had embodied skills without context or oversight. But Major Elena Cross, commander of Unit Ghost Protocol, represented something new: the synthesis of exceptional capabilities with appropriate authority and clear purpose. The briefing concluded with operational assignments and timeline confirmations. As her team prepared for deployment, Elena walked to the window overlooking the training facility where Ghost Protocol would develop tactics for missions that didn't officially exist. Her reflection in the glass showed someone she recognized but hadn't seen for 3 years. Not the haunted operator whose career had been destroyed by politics, and not the anonymous civilian hiding from her past. She saw a professional soldier ready to lead exceptional people in service of something larger than individual comfort or safety. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Heard you're back in business. Some of us never stopped believing. Looking forward to working together again. Shadow 7. Elena smiled, recognizing the call sign of her former communications specialist who'd been scattered to conventional units when Shadow 6 disbanded. Apparently, news of Ghost Protocol was spreading through networks that existed outside official channels. She typed back, Business is good. Call sign is Ghost One now. Hope you're ready for some serious work. The response came immediately. Always. Ready. Phantom never really went away, she just waited for the right mission. Elena looked out at the sunset, painting the training facility in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow would bring briefings, equipment checks, and final preparations for operations. That would test everything she'd learned about leadership, tactics, and the delicate balance between exceptional capabilities and democratic oversight. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Major Elena Cross was exactly where she belonged. The civilian tour of Fort Blackwater had ended with Elena Cross disappearing forever. But it had also begun with Phantom returning to the fight, not as a haunted operator seeking redemption, but as a leader ready to protect American interests with skills that had never really gone away. Some identities were too important to stay buried. Some capabilities were too valuable to waste in civilian anonymity. And some oaths transcended the politics and bureaucracy that tried to limit their expression. Elena Cross was gone. Phantom had evolved. And Ghost One was ready for whatever came. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.